Thanks for joining us on episode 5 of What Makes It Fun. This week we discuss user-created content. But first, I'm Blake Leftwich.
I'm Matthew Taylor.
And joining us this week is Jeff Rivera of GamerTheory.com. Thanks for being here, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, guys.
This week we're going to discuss user-created content, level editors, character customization, world builders, anything in a game or a mode in a game that engages your creative side. Can you guys think of maybe your first experience with this aspect of gaming?
I think my first experience with it was Excitebike on the NES, and of course Nintendo had that. I think there were 3 games in that programmable series, so they really made an effort to push that, and I thought it was amazing, and since then I've really scouted that out in video games.
Yeah, I remember my first exposure with it. It was a Commodore 64 game called Racing Destruction Set. If anybody's played that, they'll immediately know what I'm talking about, but it was one of those kind of top-down racers, and you could put together different tracks, and they gave you different tools as far as icy road, dirt road, paved road, and then you just kind of put your own track together, and then you'd also tune your own cars, and it was really well done. And I don't know, that's one of the first things that always pops into my mind, and not just because it was the first, but just because it was so well done, and that was back in '85. So.
Well, for me, it was probably Stunts for PC. That came out in 1990, and like your game, Jeff, it's a racing game, and you get to build different types of tracks with loop-de-loops and jumps. It was really fun, and that was the first time I had ever experienced that in a video game, the ability to create my own level or track in that case. But, that brings up an interesting point. Both you guys mentioned older games, and, this part of gaming originated in the world of personal computers where we had the ability to save content. It didn't really develop in consoles until later. And the Commodore 64 was definitely a system that allowed you to do a lot of level editing and modding, I guess you could call it.
I mean, the Commodore 64 was really a forward-thinking machine. I think if the thing had a bit more horsepower under it, it could have stayed relevant for longer than it did, but as it was, it hung around for a long time, and it was experiences like that differentiated it enough from console gaming as consoles took over that it had long legs, and that user creation stuff was a big reason why.
Do either of you guys have any experience with mods?
I've used them a little bit. I think they're pretty cool. I like a lot of the stuff they're doing with the Half-Life mods right now. I haven't played Dear Esther, but I hear that's an excellent mod using the Half-Life 2 engine, the source engine, and I'd really like to check that out. But there's been a lot of mods that have turned into major games, such as Counter-Strike and a lot of other stuff. But I don't get it in too heavily. I do have friends that do.
Any other games you guys would like to mention that you enjoyed level editing or anything like that in?
Well, just to bring it back into the newer realm, the first Little Big Planet, that was really a big deal for me. I felt like that was one of the first times where level creation really had gotten up to that point where I really felt like, okay, if I have a great idea for a platforming level, I can make it here.
Well, before we get into that, I think that falls under the umbrella of world creation, or at least that's what I call it. Before we get into that, let's start with character creation. I think this is a really common type of user-created content. And it's, and user-created content means different things to different people. What I'm talking about now is just the ability of a player to actually edit something in the world and have fun creating something within the world. And character creation is pretty common. I'm sure Jeff had WrestleMania 2000 for the N64 and made wrestlers into the wee hours of the night.
I didn't own it. My friend did, and he was always trying to get me to wrestle against the ones he made. But yeah, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah, and what's funny is I think I've been pretty vocal that I'm not a huge RPG fan. And one of the things that's always turned me off about RPGs, and this even goes back to pen and paper RPGs, is all the work you have to do to develop your character before you can play the game. That's something that really turns me off when I'm overwhelmed with choices.
Yeah, absolutely. I've played a lot of games, and it goes back to the developer having to pace their game even if it's filled with user creation aspects. But I've turned on a lot of RPGs or anything. I mean, it could even be a sports game that's asking you to create a player, and you're just immediately asked to customize all these aspects of your character, and that can be a huge turnoff.
Do you usually pick a default option, or is there always a default option?
I do. When it's available, like the Mass Effect series, for example, I've always picked John Shepard. Like a game like that's very story heavy. I just feel like, I want to play with the default character but a lot of people, I envy a lot of people who are able to have a lot of fun with that and make their own character in that universe. I get that, but it's just something I've never really been that into.
And that's why they have the default option. I do the same thing for Mass Effect. Jeff, do you find yourself, when you have that choice, just choosing the default character?
I usually do. There's lots of reasons behind it. One, the effort is definitely a hurdle to get over. And it's not that I'm lazy. It's just that the amount of effort I have to put in to best what these designers that have spent, maybe a year or two coming up with, is usually too much to try and make that better. I'm not too into putting myself into games. And so creating an original character it's pretty tough. I do like it in certain types of games, though, like Soul Calibur has a great creative character, and I've created a character that looks exactly like my wife. She was pretty surprised at how spot on it was, but that's different. Like when you're talking about RPGs, I do generally just go with the default.
Well, another aspect of that is, like, in a game like Soul Calibur, you've played that game, you've invested in that game, you've surely fought some matches already, and then you go back and make that character. Who wants to start the experience with such a hurdle?
Yeah, you're all waiting for the game to come out for months, and hype is building up to it. You put the disc in, get through the splash screens, and then the last thing you want to do is spend an hour tweaking eyebrows and noses and stuff like that, so... I'm trying to remember the game. It was an older RPG, but it was one of those first ones in 3D where you could character create. Sorry, I'm not coming up with the name of it, but I decided to change the character's hair, and I made a mistake where, like, I put one thing too low. It allowed you to move things up and down, and I didn't notice it when I was done, but then in all the cutscenes, like, his hair was coming through his neck and chin, and it just annoyed me the whole time.
If all of us are agreeing that we're usually overwhelmed with options, what could we do to solve it? I mean, what can developers do to fix that?
Well, I think what Jeff was talking about with Soul Calibur is a great example, and I hate to say, okay, I never want it in Mass Effect, because I get people who want it at the beginning of the experience, and that's kind of part of their process. But in my opinion, it's best in something like Soul Calibur, where you're already given an opportunity to get into the game, play it right away, and then come back and choose what customization you want.
Yeah, I agree with that. If it's something that's given you as an option in the game, but it's not something that's served you up front, so you feel like you're cheating somehow if you skip it.
Right.
I like the idea of you can play the game for a while and, hey, there's an option to customize a character if you so choose. Well, what about this? How about we just reduce the number of options? I've got a great example. Do you guys remember the Wii? The Wii came out. It was so awesome. We had so much fun with it. Remember how fun it was to create your own Miis? There was a very limited number of options. Do you guys think that's a good solution for other games?
Yeah, I guess it does come down to options. They do introduce too much noise in the choice. And so when you're looking at 20 different eyebrow types, it does become a little fatiguing. What I wish they would do is offer 3 or 4 basic types that then you could stretch, pull into the exact look that you want. But far too often they just try and give you too many pre-modeled ones, and after looking at 20 different, either you can't tell the difference between them or you think you don't like any of them.
Yeah, I think to make everyone happy, we just simply have to give them more choices, but not choices for your character, but choices in how you customize them. Maybe you could either choose to go with a default character, or you could choose from a limited set of options, or you could go for the hardcore full library of all their options. You know, maybe there should just be more choices in that. And, you know, I just thought about another game, Way of the Samurai. I'm a huge fan of that series. And in those games, you almost always get to choose there's like 3 heads, 3 bodies, and 3 outfits. And as you play the game, you unlock more, but I'm pretty happy to create a character with those limits. I tend to enjoy it when I have fewer options. So let's move on to another aspect, level editors. And this is something that I've enjoyed over the years. I absolutely love this aspect, and I'm a game developer. Can you guys think of some games that you've enjoyed editing levels in?
One of my favorites is a real simple one, and that's Advance Wars on the DS. You know, the Advance Wars series that started on Game Boy Advance. And, you know, it's nothing really more about than just developing some real simple terrain and placing some starting units out there. But the fact that you can share them, and it's kind of like challenging your friends, see who can make the toughest yet still passable level, that's a lot of fun.
In any multiplayer experience, user creation, you know, gets a lot better and a lot more fun to be able to share that.
You know, the first game besides Stunts that I really got into it and spent hours on was in the PlayStation era. And we mentioned this earlier. It started back, you know, Commodore 64. There was a game called Pinball Construction Set that was actually on the Apple II and Atari 800 that came out in 1983 that allowed you to create your own level or your own pinball table. And, you know, then, you know, as we moved into consoles giving you the ability to save, more console experiences have that. And the PlayStation, one of the first systems with memory card, or was it the first system? Well, that era was when we first had it on console. And I was a huge fan of Bust a Move. You guys have played Bust a Move, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you shoot bubbles up at there's a field of bubbles, and you fire bubbles at like-colored bubbles to make them pop. When there's 3 in a row, they pop. Almost all those games on the PlayStation version, actually I think every version for PlayStation had a level editor, and I would spend hours and hours and hours crafting levels, and I would go outside of even what they did. Like, there were special bubbles that when you shot them, they just popped. They were not colored. They just had to be shot at to pop, and I would make entire levels crafted of those puzzles. So I was changing the rules of the game in the levels I was creating. I had so much fun with those, but I spent a lot of time on them and had, you know, there was no one to share them with. And, you know, now, thankfully, these days, a game that's a little more recent, Gravity Crash for PlayStation Network, kind of obscure. I don't think it was a big hit, but it's a game that's similar to like a Gravatar or an asteroids type control where you can rotate and shoot. And there's gravity, and you have to thrust so you don't fall into the earth and explode. Well, there was a level editor for that game. It was so great. I had a lot of fun and spent many hours creating a couple of levels for that, too. And that one I could share online on PSN, even though it had a pretty limited audience. But still, that was definitely a lot of fun. Yeah. Any other level editor talk?
One I would like to mention, but not really talk about, is Worms Armageddon. Was a lot of fun doing that. And before I forget about mentioning it, is you've mentioned Stunts a couple of times, and I played that a lot as well. And one of the real genius things about that is they let you just put things together that made no sense. And my friend and I, we both had the game, and we would oftentimes meet up after school just to see the crazy stuff that we had made. Like, you could glitch the car out and it would send it 500 feet up in the air, and the whole track would just be a little pinpoint at the bottom. And we would watch each other's funny replays for hours just based on the crazy tracks we put. And that's one thing I always really liked about that game, is they just let you break it and they didn't care. So,
you know, every episode of this podcast we seem to come up with another great topic. And glitching games is certainly this like breaking of the fourth wall, playing a game in a way that it was not intended to be played and having a ton of fun with it. And I think glitching falls into that category. We've got to talk about that in an upcoming episode. Yeah, that was what I did with Stunts too. I mean, I got to be honest. I think more often than not, I never worried about making a complete course. I just tried to make a really straight line so I could go really fast off a ramp and run into something, and that would shoot me off into space, just so we could laugh at the replays. You're right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about world creation. Matt just introduced me to the wonderful world of Minecraft, which is fantastic. But before we get into that, you guys remember Little Big Planet? I had so much fun with that, and I spent hours on that one again, creating not just a level, but an entire world, the rules of how the game itself was played, like how you got from point A to point B and what constituted the end of that level. I had the power in that game to make all the rules, which was really fantastic.
I tried really hard to make cool stuff, and I would either lose patience or I'd find one spot in the middle of it that broke everything, and then trying to fix that spot, it would mess, everything else up. But you know what? Playing some of the other things that people did who were much better at it than I was, it was pretty inspiring, and I just didn't have the time to buckle down and get really good at the tool set, but I thought it was awesome. I just never got that good at it.
One of the great things about Little Big Planet, and I think this is a common theme in a lot of user creation stuff, is that you get that instant gratification where it's like, I'm going to place this here, and then you immediately hit the play button and see how it reacts. And even if I don't end up publishing the level or sharing it with people, that in and of itself is a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this leads me to my next question. When we were playing Minecraft, this was my first experience playing it, and I was complaining about the time limit in the beginning. Matt was walking me through it. He's doing a great job of really getting me into this world, but I started to see it get darker, and he's like, okay, we've really got to finish this house or the monsters are going to get us. And I started getting a little frustrated because I wanted more time to build my house just so. Right? And I understand that later in the game, it's not like it's so difficult. You can take your time and go back and fix it later if you want to. It's not a big deal. But, where do we draw that line? Little Big Planet, there were no rules. There were no obstacles. Okay? You just got to create. In Minecraft, it's more of a game experience, even though there's a lot of focus on limited resources and time limits. Do you guys think that should be eliminated? I mean, should it be all about pure creation, or do we need those obstacles?
I think some developers want to craft that in between. That Minecraft, that's what that game does, is it gives you this very slight goal. It's just saying, hey, do whatever you want to do, but at the end of the day, there are these obstacles and there are things to get in your way. You're right, those games do strike a clear contrast.
Yeah, and you really argued with me that the game does need those things.
Yeah.
Like time limits. But, I say to you, well, what about Little Big Planet where we just get to create? And we even discussed that on the PC version, there's a mode in Minecraft that allows you to just create with no restrictions. And I was really into that idea more than the actual, discovering dungeons in the game, encountering monsters in the game, and of course meeting other people online if you chose to play it online.
I think that goes back to your not liking RPGs a whole lot, because it is an RPG experience in that game, because you really are, at the end of the day, you feel like you're not leveling up, but you're leveling up your house, and then you go out and the next day and get more stuff, and you feel like you've worked for something. And I've met a lot of people, and maybe you're just one of them, Blake, who just don't enjoy working in a digital realm, don't enjoy working when they don't get to necessarily see the fruits of their labor.
Yeah, I tend to want to eliminate the work. I tend to want to get straight to the satisfaction of seeing my creation. The work it requires to get there, I want to eliminate that.
Right.
So, it comes down to the type of gamer again, as always. Well, that's it for this week. Before we go, I'd like to talk about gamer theory and ask you, Jeff, what's going on with gamer theory and everything else.
Well, it's nothing too special. It's kind of just the evolution. I had the Stupid Gamer blog for years, and I still update that about twice a month. But I wanted something a little bit more official as far as websites goes. So I've got a few writers that write with me, and we don't chase down every news story or anything like that. We just basically write what we want and kind of have our own identity. Obviously, to grow, we're going to have to do more output, but I'm excited. We have E3 coming up, and we cover all the consoles, handhelds, mobile, and PC. So we're pretty much everywhere as far as coverage goes, but it's fun. It's been nice. We've had great response, and a lot of readers chime in on what we're doing, so that's always satisfying. So
I definitely want to recommend Gamer Theory to anyone who wants some. You tend to have this, Ray, when you go to E3, you really write, that little stuff that gives it that personal touch. It's not entirely just press releases and everything else. For anyone who wants to get a taste of the experience of E3, I always feel like you're able to capture that as best as anything I've seen.
Yeah, I'll be doing that style again, where basically I kind of break down hour by hour what I did on the show floor that day, what I thought about what I was seeing. It's almost like a journal.
Yeah.
But that's definitely going to be back for this year.
That's one of my favorite things about your writing style, Jeff, is that you always, I just always feel like I'm reading something different. I never feel like I'm reading the same old thing. So it's really nice. You always have a unique perspective, and I really always love it.
All right, well, thanks, Jeff, for being with us. That's it for this week. You can always chime in on this discussion and anything else you're thinking about at mail@whatmakesitfun.com. And you can always call us at 331-222-WMIF. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/whatmakesitfun. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/whatmakesitfun. Anything else, Blake?
We'll see you next week.